Let's see what Charles Darwin says. Okay, the originator of this concept. He says, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? So Darwin himself was aware that if his theory is true and that he himself is a product of evolution, he would doubt the convictions of his mind. Because imagine all our decisions, all our preferences and conclusions are guided by the atoms that are dancing in our head. So all our decisions are made purely based on how they're dancing. It's not really because we genuinely made that decision. And if I illustrate in another way, what he's saying is, you have animals and you have a context, an attribute called intelligence. Does being more intelligent make you human? There are many, many attributes that sit outside of intelligence. Morality is one. You don't just derive morality by getting smarter. Okay? You have self-awareness. A very strange thing. Like I said, the lion doesn't sleep one day to ask himself whether he will stop eating the next day. There's no self-awareness. And Darwin himself calls this out. Truth actually is a concept that sits outside of evolution. Because all it cares about is survival. Does it care about whether Donald Trump was the president of the United States in 2026? Makes no difference to survival. If they can get history wrong, it doesn't matter as long as you survive. So you cannot evolve from animals to humans because of the qualitative aspects that sit outside of the evolution. So how do you cross that boundary? That's what Darwin is puzzled about. And I think that is right. You can't. I'll show you a couple more evolutionists. So these are the atheists who have a very honest view of what naturalistic evolution means. Okay. According to the atheistic evolutionists, Michael Ruse, E.O. Wilson, morality is a corporate illusion that has been fought off on us by our genes to get us to cooperate. We think we really ought to love little children, but we are wrong to conclude that right and wrong really exists. This illusion that we have moral duties is compelling and strong. Without it, we ignore or disobey our moral impulses. However, Paul Copan says that having moral inclinations is far different from having moral duties. One is that you feel compelled to do something. The other is you ought to do something. Just because you feel like doing something doesn't make it right. So really, it's about moving from the is to the ought. So according to skeptic Michael Shermer, again, another naturalist, asking why should we be moral, he says it's like wondering why we should be hungry or horny. Shermer insists that the answer is that it's as much a part of human nature to be moral as it is to be hungry, horny, jealous, and in love. He's saying that it is so obvious. It just is. Why do we even question? But the thing is, just because things are the way it is, doesn't mean that this is what it ought to be. think about problem of slavery, right? There was a period of time where slavery was accepted. Widely accepted. Why were we able to get out of that norm to fight for what ought to be? That it is wrong. It should be stopped. That's the difference between is and ought. Right? The hypothetically, let's imagine if Hitler had won the war. Okay? Eliminated all the Jews. And let's say the whole world agrees with him. Would that have made him right? No. That's what morality means, right? Even if the whole world does it, trustingly, it would still be wrong. That's what we mean by morality. That's the ought that evolution cannot give you. I'll flesh this out a bit more, okay? When evolution is your only alternative, your morality becomes arbitrary. Whatever is good for survival and whatever is happening becomes your morality. So there's no ought. It's only is. So Ruse and Wilson, they accept this. They report that instead of having evolved from savanna-dwelling primates, we, like termites, could have evolved needing to dwell in darkness, eat each other's waste, and cannibalize the dead. If the latter were the case, we would extol such acts as beautiful and moral, and find it morally disgusting to live in the open air, dispose of body waste, and bury the dead. You get what he's trying to say? If we were termites and we happen to survive by living in the dark, by eating each other, that would become correct. But does it feel right? Does it match up to reality and the human experience? I don't think it does. So you might have a concept, but if it doesn't match here, then it doesn't work. Alvin Plantinga has an interesting analogy. Look, evolution doesn't care about truth, right? It doesn't care about whether Trump was the president in 2026. What it cares about is survival. So he says, imagine, okay? Imagine a human who sees a tiger and he forms the belief that this is a great opportunity to play catching with the tiger, okay? So he runs away from the tiger playing catching. And because of that, he survives, right? So human beings who play catching with the tiger will survive. And more human beings will come with the belief that it's a great opportunity to play catching with the tiger. They survive. But is that notion true? Is it really a great opportunity to play catching with a tiger? Or is it more that tigers are going to eat us out for lunch if we don't run? Right? Both has the same outcome. If you run because you know the tiger is dangerous, or you run because you think the tiger likes to play catching with you, both achieve the same outcome. But one is true and the other is not. And evolution does not care about whether it's true. So when the atheist says that evolution is the only way, then their atheism is actually not something that's rational also. They are atheists because of the atoms that tell them they are. Right? So there's no way to talk about truth in that manner. So I hope it's clear to you why the divine foundation of God is so much more reasonable. And when we talk about naturalistic evolution, it just doesn't match. And we've talked about it philosophically. There are also scientific tracks that we can talk about our week. So the God hypothesis doesn't force us to make a huge leap from valuelessness to value. Rather, we begin with value God's good character, and we end with value, divine image bearing humans with moral responsibility and rights. A good God effectively bridges the chasm between east and port. Value exists from the very beginning. It is rooted in a self-existent good God. So for all their criticisms of religion, new atheists still lack the moral foundations to justify genuine moral criticism of theism. Nor can atheism truly ground moral value or human dignity and worth. So God as a reason is still much more viable, and it matches up with reality and experience. So if we do, the skeptic does claim that God is evil, therefore you cannot believe in God. And if they end up rejecting God, they end up rejecting the foundations of their argument. So it becomes a self-defeating argument. And then when they try to propose that naturalistic evolution can be the explanation for morality, I have shown you briefly why it fails. Fails quite badly. Okay? So, when we say he's got a moral monster, even if we conclude that he is, you need a way to define good and evil. So my suggestion is if we really struggle with the concept of God goodness, rather than take him out of the picture, it's much more reasonable to wrestle through it to understand why his character is as such, and one explains it best, rather than take the first step of removing him, which creates a much bigger problem. Okay? Now, the second part of today, Jesus is the fulfiller of the Old Testament. In fact, we'll talk more about just a snapshot of some of the historical progress that Jews and Christians have contributed to. And here, I would say it backs up the reality and experience. God is good. His values are good. And therefore, we will see the outworkings and the goodness of his laws on society.